I can't say that I'm leveraging it well enough either, but I do have my podcast out there, and it's already starting to jump impressions. Hey, this is KB. I'm a technologist, thought leader, and self-published author. I've been publishing ebooks, print books, audio, video, and other content online since 2015. I stumbled quite a bit, tried many different types of content, marketing strategies, software tools, and social media streams. Now I'm here to help you learn from my mistakes and find inspiration along the way. We'll take a journey together to leverage your content, dive into practical tips, and test out actionable strategies that move you from posts to profit. This is the Self-Pub Empire Podcast. Welcome back to the Self-Pub Empire Podcast. I'm your host, KB, and I'm really excited today to talk a little bit more about podcasting. I do enjoy the topic quite a bit. I am exploring this world of podcasting myself, so come take a journey with me as we talk through a little bit about YouTube podcasting today. I mentioned this previously in my early setup of my podcast to help you work through what you can do for your own podcast. But as you may know, Google Podcasts is going away. They're stating mid-2024, sometime then. There's no specific date that I could find, but sometime mid-2024, they're going to remove Google Podcasts completely and shut that down. All of that is to be moved to YouTube podcasts. They are not doing this automatically for you. You're going to have to do it yourself and load your podcast into YouTube podcasts, which I will go through in detail today, and hopefully that'll help you get started. I had to try it out for myself, and really I ended up just cookbooking my way through it, as I like to say. Can't blame them. YouTube Music, for having them as their hosting for their podcasts for YouTube, and Google Podcasts instead. It makes sense, as YouTube really has about 2.7 billion active users. That's 2.7 billion with a B, not an M, a B. I'm not surprised by that either. So this ends up having the podcast, your podcast in this particular instance, end up on YouTube with all the search engines and everything else running against that for showing it for other folks to be able to listen to. Authors, I think, too, as a side note, if you're an author, self-published author, I think you can use this information as well. Definitely this is aimed at podcasters, but certainly as an author, this is very similar to using the functionality of a regular YouTube channel, and many of those aspects still apply. Putting some audio, perhaps, of your book that you've read or cover info of your book on YouTube, maybe as the thumbnail, really can only help you with your exposure for your book and really other creations as well. But I'm going to focus on an author at this point. And Google, of course, has analytics that really are unmatched. I have to admit, analytics from Google are outstanding and definitely the leader in the industry. They've been doing it for a long time. They know what to do with online analytics, and putting it out there just pushes it more into the Google search algorithms. If you think about it from that perspective, they have YouTube coming up in the Google searches. So there's another outlet for people to find your content and link back to your website for going and moving from posts to profit. You do have a website, I hope. Definitely, we talked about that in the past to make your website your monetary nexus. Going to talk about that in more detail in the future because I want to give you actionable material to ramp up your own post-to-profits efforts. So let's jump in. So where do we start? It all starts with YouTube Studio. Ever since YouTube Studio came out a few years back, they've really pushed their content creation. That would be they, as in Google and YouTube, has pushed their content creation and aspects of publishing your content out on YouTube, really in that studio format or in the studio interface, that dashboard. It is very useful. They could cram more information into the studio. So that's where they're putting all that. And that's where you want to start. You want to start with YouTube Studio. Again, I'm going to comment, you definitely have to have your own RSS feed or hosting. Google Podcasts is not really made to be the central host. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But you want to go to your content and your podcast tab. And really that's where you create or set up an existing playlist and you submit your RSS feed to that. All I really needed to do personally was use my Anchor/Spotify podcast RSS feed and put it in there. That was really simple and that worked really well. You need to do one-time verification. That's to be able to access advanced features. I thought this was interesting as well because this took a little time. You use a video verification. You record a little bit of a video. It gets verified up to 1 day of you, and you use a valid ID of some kind, a government ID with a picture, and it goes through and it validates that, taking maybe up to a day. And then it also requires that you build up some channel history, somewhere around 2 months worth. I thought this was very interesting because they're trying to squash scammers and spammers and certainly bad content or illegal content. They're certainly trying to continue to get rid of that. So this video verification of basically it's taking a video of your face. Hopefully you have a webcam. I really sure hope you do. And using your valid ID, government ID of some kind, to verify that this is really you and this is really your podcast. I thought that was very interesting. So this valid ID, you also need to use a phone number, which texts you a code, a 6-digit verification code. That's called multi-factor authentication. It's something you have, which is your phone, and something you enter, of course, which is usually a password. So as a side note, multi-factor authentication, most of these websites are going to it, especially for content creation. So keep that in mind. That gets verified successfully. And then the page really just sat there. I had to flip back to YouTube Studio. So this process then sends you an email. You can scan a QR code as well. You confirm your date of birth, which I thought was interesting on your phone. And of course, it stores your information, like your image and such, your picture, into your Google account with some disclaimers and things like that that you can read, especially if you're an attorney. But I don't really go through all the details on that. They are stating that they don't keep the data. So the photo taken of the ID and of you, they are only keeping really just 24 hours or so to look for the match and get that date of birth matched up. And then they're saying that they're going to delete that. I don't really care too much about that. I don't think that's really going to do anyone any good to have my picture of my face because it's already out on the internet. So I didn't really mind that at all. So once that verification is done, as here we are, I'm flowing through this and cookbooking my way through it, just following the directions. Once that verification happens, then you can go back to YouTube Studio, the podcast tab, and select new podcast and then submit RSS feeds. So there's actually quite a few steps just to get started and verify that I was the owner. Really specific for the podcast itself. I had other YouTube videos up there that didn't require this level of verification. And I submitted my RSS feed, again, from Anchor/Spotify. There are, of course, the standard terms of service for ingestion of that data. And then you get to a fun little how it works page. And this I'm going to actually talk about in detail for each of these things because I thought this part was really particularly interesting. For each episode, so the How It Works page starts with this. For each episode in the RSS feed, YouTube will create a static image video that you can see out there on my YouTube feed, and it will upload it to your channel. So usually for me, my recommendation is always to have a nice piece of cover art for your particular episode. And so if it has that on your hosting platform, again, Spotify does this for me really well. I just upload that. It will ingest that and turn that into a static image video with my audio on it. Actually works pretty slick. Number two, the second thing, they may remove any invalid characters from titles or description in the feed. So if you have interesting characters in your feed, they will remove it. We also may, it says, truncate titles or descriptions if they exceed the character limits. I don't know what the character limits are. I think they're pretty big, but I actually couldn't tell, and I couldn't find any information about how big that actually is. So we'll truncate if you have a really huge title. Finally, they of course state that if you are posting anything that's copyright infringement or violates their terms of service, they also have the rights to remove everything. That's pretty standard in that particular case for YouTube these days. So that wasn't too much of a surprise. So then I entered my feed. And once again, I had to go do a send verification code process, this time to my email address, remember how important that part was from my previous podcast episode about podcasting, make sure you have a valid email address in your hosting site, because it actually ingested that as well from my Spotify page, and it pulled that in. So it was able to email me, and I got a code in my email from that, and I was able to enter my code, and it really didn't take that very long. Then I could upload all or some of my podcasts. It allowed me to decide, which of course I went with all of them. And the other interesting thing I found was that visibility is really private until all the episodes are loaded. So it actually took quite a while. This surprised me as well. It took quite a while to go and request that information from Spotify and load that podcast into the system, into the YouTube Music podcast system. So the channel started to upload and started to get that information pulled in. So then I had to wait for a notification again to go back to the studio, and YouTube Studio that is, and hit publish. And it changes all the episodes to being visible, being public, and they're now published out there. And it also became automatically a cool playlist on my channel. So this process took a little while, as you can kind of tell. There are a number of hangups or challenges to make sure that everything is loaded correctly and that all things were verified appropriately. And there were a number of 6-digit verification codes for multi-factor authentication. Another thing which was using an email address or your phone to make sure you have a valid mobile phone number. Those are some of those gotchas. Make sure you have your government ID, whatever that looks like, to make sure you've got a photo ID of some kind to verify that as well. So those are some of the gotchas there for actually trying to set that up, which surprised me. I really just assumed that a podcast list just ingests your RSS feed and it would just run it. But apparently they're really clamping down on those kinds of automatic ingestion things. And I think that's really the main difference, is the fact that it's actually pulling data from my hosting site with that information in it. And so they don't want that information just coming in if it isn't verified. It's a little different, I think, if you're just uploading your own video. They don't know exactly where that's coming from. And there's all kinds of artificial intelligence checks, if you've ever uploaded a YouTube video anytime recently, to make sure that there's no copyright infringement and things like that. So I thought that process wasn't difficult, but it did take some time. The results of it were pretty cool, I have to admit, because the automatic playlist was created. It pulled in all of my images for each of my episodes. So those looked really cool. And the descriptions were pulled in as well. And for the most part, it didn't look like anything was truncated or I had any invalid characters. And I have a few interesting descriptions with cool little emojis and things like that on there. So I think that worked out pretty well. So I was pretty impressed with the results, even though it took a few extra steps to do. So once we got to that point, I decided to customize my channel. So that's the next thing that I would recommend that you go and do. To do this, once again, you have to go into YouTube Studio. And you can go then into the customization tab on the left, or menu item on the left, to go through and customize. I found it very interesting to make sure that you wanted to, I thought I wanted to make sure I wanted to add my URL link. So I linked it to my website. That's very important because, again, if you've been following along, your website is your monetary nexus. It's where you control that. And driving traffic to your website really is a good thing. And it's really what you want to do so that you can drive them back out to wherever it is that you want to have your profit, whatever profit pieces that you're going to have, or paying for content, or whatever it is you're going to do. So linking that back to your website can only help you. You want to make sure that you update your unique handle. Mine's actually very simple. It's youtube.com/@selfpubempire. So someone can actually just go to www.youtube.com/@selfpubempire, and poof, you'll be right at my channel and are able to take a look at my videos and go right to the first playlist to check it out. You want to make sure that you ensure your description works for you. I recommend a version that has search engine optimization in it. So there's some keywords, and that you can use that also on your website, and make sure that that matches between the two. And those keywords are really, really important, whatever it is that you're talking about, in particular podcast. But again, if you're an author, you can create this information and just do videos. Make sure your descriptions have those keywords in it, and that helps drive traffic to your site and impressions on your channel. Of course, there's the usual things. You can upload your picture, a banner image. You can upload a video watermark. That's not something I bothered doing because my whole image for each of the episodes really does have a podcast watermark to it. The whole thing shows the podcast itself. You can also select a video spotlight, the preview, featured video for returning subscribers. There's featured sections. Customizing your channel could be something you could spend your whole life on. And you could spend a lot of time working through all the things that you can customize on your YouTube channel. I felt that getting some information up there that matched the website was collateral that I already had, assets that I already owned for images and stock information. I was able to just upload those and use those right away in the customization on that channel. Thought that was really helpful and useful. And as a matter of fact, having talked about this a little bit, I know that I personally need to go back and look at my description because I don't think that actually matches my website and what my normal podcast description should be. I don't know that actually updates itself automatically. And that's a little tip too. When you upload a video or create a video on your hosting platform and YouTube is going to ingest it, I actually had to go out there and double check to make sure that it was publishable. It was not set to published. It was still private and it wasn't available. And that was a day later. And I'm glad I checked it because it had never really became visible. I don't know if there's a default section on there. I'll be honest with you. I did a little research. I couldn't find anything about that. So I was trying to figure that part out, but maybe I missed it. And maybe you guys can give me some information or put a comment in there and guide me in the right direction and help me out as to how to make sure that those are automatically set to public as soon as they hit YouTube. So either way, I had to go there, double check it. And as I'm thinking about it, I'm going to double check my description as well to make sure it matches all my other descriptions for my podcast. So there you go. Those are the two big things to start with. Getting things ingested from your RSS feed and getting your channel customized to make sure that you at least have some consistency in your branding and in your message, and make sure that you have your podcasts that are up there and listed and ready to go and public. So finally, where does that leave us? That leaves us looking at the analytics page. And I'll tell you, the analytics page is almost overwhelming. It is amazing. I said it before. I'll say it again. I don't know that anybody can beat Google in analytics. I think many people try. I think Amazon's pretty close, but they don't allow you to see as much of that information. Google has all of that information in there on YouTube in your page to look at. Go check out your analytics. You can see the impressions, how many times your podcasts are coming up in searches. You can see how many times they're listened to, how long they're listened to, all those things. And they really were able to use the YouTube functionality for podcasts, which again made it really a no-brainer for them to say, we're not going to keep up with Google Podcasts from a technology perspective when YouTube pretty much has everything we need. And all we really need to do is get some RSS feed pieces in there so that folks can feed that to it, and analytics will come along for the ride. So it's very Google-ish, similar to other analytics that Google has. You're going to see the views, you're going to see the watch time, you're going to see subscribers, and all of these things, of course, are your vanity metrics, which I'll talk about sometime in a later podcast, but it's still interesting and useful information. Are your keywords creating the impressions that you want? So you're starting to get that exposure so that people are starting to see it come up in the suggested podcasts in YouTube Music or on YouTube itself. So keep that in mind too. It's not just on YouTube Music. They're also available in just YouTube proper. And so going back to that 2.7 billion people, it's going to go up a little bit from the Google Podcasts page, of course, or app, people who have actually join the app for that, they're going to get pushed over to YouTube Music, and you're going to see that number go up a little bit. But 2.7 billion is a pretty big number, and the amount of searching that happens is staggering out there. So you're going to get these impressions, and you're going to get, hopefully, if you do it right and have your URL set up, you're going to drive that traffic to the right spot. So that's the cookbook portion of the podcast today on really how to get this set up. Surprisingly, it took me a little bit of time. For me, it was definitely worth it to do, and I encourage you to give it a try yourself. But let's do a little recap and remember some of these tips and tricks that I'm talking about here, and making sure that you don't trip up like I did just now and do the wrong thing. So remember a couple of things here. Number one, YouTube Podcasts is not a hosting company in that classic sense for podcasts. They will not provide an RSS feed for other platforms, but it will display your podcast if you give it a feed. So interestingly enough, that data actually is coming from a different hosting platform, and YouTube is ingesting it. I don't know if they're making a copy of the audio and so that it's there, but either way, you cannot use it as the central hosting platform for distributing your RSS feed out to other platforms. Number two, the podcasts are only available on YouTube and YouTube Music. And of course, given the previous comment for number one, that's relatively obvious, but there's a nuance here that the reason why I wanted to point that out was, again, because it actually is YouTube and YouTube Music. So that's not just one thing, it is two things, and it's two different apps. So depending on where your people are, or your folks that are listening to you, they can use either one and still find you. And I think that's important and very useful. Number three, always double check the show details, because sometimes they do not come over automatically. I actually, again, looked for this information and really couldn't find any information about that. Double check it. It doesn't seem to come over from your RSS feed. I hope I'm wrong. Send me a comment. Let me know what you think. But you have to do this automatically, and you probably should check it anyway. Most of my podcast outlets, I don't double check personally, because I already know that those are working fine. This one is different because it's newer. So I'm going to go and double check it. As I said before, I'm actually going to go double check my description as well. Number four, if you change a podcast on your hosting platform, again, you need to double check it, and most likely will update your podcast when you reload it. Now, what's interesting there is the descriptions don't seem to load well or come over very much automatically if you update them, but the RSS feed will get updated. It just does take some time. But still, same thing as number three and number four. Moral of the story, double check. Number five, YouTube Studio. That particular app or website is the place to make your changes. That's really where you want and have the most control. It also has the analytics there as well. And finally, number six, most of those AI features on YouTube are functioning on a podcast. So even for mine, it created a transcript automatically for my podcasts. So I have a text transcript that's there. That's a whole interesting thing that most things won't let you do. There's a wide variety of ways to get your transcript for any given podcast, because it's all speech to text, of course, and sometimes that can be inaccurate. But YouTube's been analyzing voice data for a long time now, and they have some pretty good AI to create transcripts from most videos, or closed captioning for most videos. So it will create that for you, for example. But most of those AI features are there. And of course, if you're using copywritten music, it'll probably flag that, and it's going to catch that as well. All right, so there you have it in a nutshell. That's my cookbook way of getting ready to go through and get your podcasts out on YouTube. I highly encourage anybody to take a look at that, and just use YouTube in general as a creator, as another search outlet, another outlet for your content that gets searched and analyzed and impressions and drives traffic. I think many authors, creators, don't leverage it probably well enough. I can't say that I'm leveraging it well enough either, but I do have my podcasts out there, and it's already starting to jump impressions as soon as I did it. So I highly encourage you to do that. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I enjoyed walking through this with you and cookbooking my way through it. I hope that you give it a shot and that you go from posts to profit. See you next time. Hey, congratulations. You just listened to another episode of the Self-Pub Empire Podcast. I really hope you found something inspiring, useful, and actionable for your own entrepreneurial and business aspirations. Let's keep connecting as solopreneurs, authors, and online creators of all kinds. For more information, how-tos, great tools, and show notes for the show, head over to selfpubempire.com/podcast. Until next time, let's continue moving from posts to profit.